He left without a word after the harvest. She found him 3 counties away and brought him home. Pell Stoddard left on a Sunday morning in October, 2 days after the last of the wheat was cut and stacked, and the threshing crew had gone home. He left before dawn, taking his horse and his saddlebags and nothing else. Not the house he had built, not the barn he had raised, not the 200 acres of Dakota Territory land that he had plowed and planted and harvested for 6 years, through drought and grasshoppers, and one hailstorm that flattened an entire field in 11 minutes, and not Linnea Voss, who woke in the house they shared to find his side of the bed cold, and his boots gone from the door, and a silence in the rooms that was different from ordinary silence, because it was the silence of absence rather than the silence of sleep. There was no note. There was no explanation left on the kitchen table, or tacked to the barn door, or spoken to the neighbor. There was simply a man who had been present and was now gone, and the going was total and without warning, and Linnea stood in the kitchen of the house they had built together and looked at the empty hook where his coat had hung and felt the floor shift beneath her feet, not physically, but in the deeper sense of a foundation that she had believed was solid, revealing itself to be something else entirely. She did not cry. She was not by temperament a woman who cried first and thought second. She was a woman who thought first and thoroughly, and then, if crying was warranted, would cry at a time and place of her choosing. She was 29, the daughter of Norwegian immigrants who had settled in the valley when Linnea was 12, and she had married Pell Stoddard when she was 23, in the clapboard church at the crossroads, because he was steady and honest and good with the land, and because she loved him, in that order. Because the daughter of immigrants learns to value practicality before romance, and because Pell had been practical enough to love. She went to the barn first. His horse was gone. The saddle was gone. The saddlebags were gone. Everything else remained: the plow, the harrow, the seed drill, the wagon, the tools, the milk cow, the chickens, the farm. He had taken himself and nothing else, as though his departure was a kind of surgery, removing only the one thing he considered his, and leaving everything that belonged to the life they had shared. She went to the nearest neighbor. The neighbor was Arvid Lund, a Swede of 50 who farmed the quarter section to the north, and who had known Pell since he arrived in the territory. "Pell is gone," Linnea said. Arvid looked at her. He did not ask where or why, because the expression on her face answered both questions. She did not know where, and she did not know why, and the not knowing was written in the particular set of her jaw and the particular stillness of her hands. Since when? This morning, before dawn. He took his horse and his bags and nothing else. Did he say anything? Nothing. No note, no word to anyone. Arvid was quiet for a long time. He was quiet in the way that men of the northern plains are quiet, not from lack of thought, but from the surplus of it, the thoughts accumulating like snow on a still day, until the man decides which ones are worth the effort of speech and lets the rest melt. "Pell has been troubled," Arvid said finally. "Since the spring, since the grasshoppers took the first planting and he had to replant, and the replanting came in thin, and the debt at the land office grew instead of shrank. He has been carrying something. I saw it in the way he worked, harder than the work required, as though the work was not farming but penance. He did not tell me. Men like Pell do not tell. They carry. And when the carrying becomes too heavy, they set it down by leaving, because leaving is the only way they know to put something down." Linnea went home. She sat at the kitchen table and thought. She thought for 3 hours, through the morning and into the afternoon, while the milk cow lowed in the barn, and the chickens paced the yard, and the farm waited with the patient indifference of land that does not care who works it. She thought about Pell. She thought about the grasshoppers and the thin replanting, and the debt, and the way he had been quieter than usual since spring, quieter even than his normal quiet, which was considerable. She thought about the mornings when she had found him standing at the window before dawn, looking at the fields with an expression she had not understood, but that she now recognized as the expression of a man calculating a debt he cannot pay, and deciding that the only honorable response is to remove himself from the equation so that the debt becomes his alone. He had left to protect her. The realization arrived not as a surprise, but as a confirmation, the way a diagnosis confirms what the symptoms have been saying. He had left because the debt was his. The land office loan was in his name, and if he stayed, the debt would consume the farm, and the farm was her security, and he would rather lose himself than lose her security. It was the logic of a man who loved someone enough to leave them, and who was wrong about the leaving being the right thing to do, but who was right about the love. She decided to find him. She decided it the way she decided everything, completely, without reservation, with the full weight of her will behind the choice. The decision was not impulsive. It was the product of 3 hours of thinking and 29 years of being the kind of woman who does not accept outcomes she did not choose. She did not choose Pell's departure. She did not agree to it. She had not been consulted, and the lack of consultation was itself a form of disrespect that her Norwegian mother would have called unforgivable, and that Linnea called fixable, because she believed that most things were fixable if you were willing to do the work. She left the farm with Arvid. She asked him to tend the animals and watch the property, and Arvid agreed without argument because arguing with Linnea Voss was an activity that produced no results and considerable frustration, and because Arvid, who had been married to a Norwegian woman himself for 30 years before she passed, recognized the tone and the posture and the set of the jaw, and knew that compliance was the only sensible response. She took the wagon and the draft horse, a big chestnut named Olaf after her grandfather, and 3 days of food, and the quilt from the bed, because October nights in Dakota Territory are cold, and a quilt is not a luxury but a necessity. She drove south because south was the direction of the main road, and the main road led to towns where a man on a horse might stop for work or supplies, or the particular comfort of anonymity that small towns offer to people who are running from their lives. She stopped at every town, sleeping in the wagon bed under the quilt with the draft horse hobbled nearby, eating the bread and cheese she had packed, and drinking creek water, and waking each morning with the cold stiffness of a woman who has slept on boards but who gets up anyway, because the getting up is not optional. She stopped at Milford, which was a town of 40 buildings and 200 people, and asked at the livery stable and the general store and the saloon if anyone had seen a man on a bay horse, tall, quiet, with the hands of a farmer, and the expression of a man who was not where he wanted to be. No one had. She drove on to Bridger and asked the same questions, and received the same answers. Shaken heads, apologetic shrugs, the well-meaning suggestions of strangers who wanted to help but could not. She drove on through a night of cold rain that soaked the quilt and turned the road to mud, the draft horse pulling the wagon through ruts that grabbed the wheels and held them. And she did not stop, because stopping meant accepting that the search might fail, and she had not driven this far to accept failure. She drove on to Clement Station, which was 3 counties south of home, and 2 days of travel, and she asked at the feed store, and the man behind the counter said yes. Tall fellow, bay horse, came in yesterday, bought oats and a sack of flour. Looked like he had been sleeping rough. Where did he go? South on the county road. There is a line camp at the base of the bluffs that the cattlemen use in summer. It would be empty this time of year. Linnea drove to the line camp. She found it at the end of a track that wound through cottonwoods along a creek, a small cabin with a corral and a lean-to, and a thread of smoke coming from the chimney that told her everything she needed to know. His bay horse was standing in the corral, head down, looking as tired and misplaced as its rider. His saddlebags were on the porch. The man who had left without a word was inside the cabin that was not his, 3 counties from the life that was. She did not knock. She opened the door and walked in, and Pell Stoddard, who was sitting at a table that did not belong to him eating flour biscuits that he had made badly, looked up and saw his wife standing in the doorway with 3 days of travel on her face, and the quilt from their bed over her arm, and an expression that was not anger, and not relief, but something between the two, that he did not have a name for, and that Linnea would later describe as the feeling of finding something you lost, and wanting to shake it and hold it at the same time. Linnea. His voice was the voice of a man who has been caught doing something he knows is wrong, and cannot explain why he did it, except that the wrongness felt, at the time, like the least wrong of the available options. "Get up," she said. "We are going home." "I cannot go home. The debt." The debt is $47 at the land office. I know because I went to the land office before I left. $47 is not a reason to leave your wife and your farm and your life. $47 is a number. It is not a catastrophe. It is a debt I cannot pay. It is a debt we cannot pay alone. Together we can pay it. Separately we cannot pay anything. Because you are in a borrowed cabin eating bad biscuits, and I am in a farmhouse with no husband, and neither of those situations produces $47. Pell looked at his wife. He looked at her the way a man looks at the thing he left behind when the thing he left behind comes through the door and tells him he was wrong. And the telling is not cruel, but factual, delivered with the particular authority of a woman who has driven a wagon for 2 days across 3 counties because she decided that her husband's decision was incorrect and that the correction required her presence. I left to protect you, he said. I know, and the protection was not yours to give without asking. We are married, Pell. Married means the debts are shared, and the decisions are shared, and the leaving, if there is leaving, is shared. You do not get to decide for both of us by disappearing before dawn. I was ashamed. Shame is not a reason. Shame is a feeling. Feelings pass. Farms do not run themselves. Wives do not wait forever. And $47 is not worth a marriage. Pell Stoddard stood up from the table in the borrowed cabin. He stood up slowly, the way a man stands who has been sitting with a weight on his shoulders and is not sure whether the weight has been lifted or merely shifted. He looked at Linnea. He looked at the quilt from their bed. He looked at the door behind her, which opened onto the road that led north, back to the farm, back to the life he had tried to leave, back to the woman who had refused to let him. I am sorry, he said. I know. You can be sorry on the road. We have 2 days of driving ahead of us, and the milk cow has not been properly fed since you left. They drove home together, the wagon and the bay horse tied behind, 2 days north through the Dakota autumn, with the cottonwoods turning gold along the creeks, and the grass going brown on the hills, and the sky so wide it seemed to have opinions about everything beneath it. They did not talk much on the first day. Pell drove, and Linnea sat beside him, and the silence between them was not hostile, but heavy, weighted with everything that had not been said since spring. The worry he had hidden, the distance she had felt, the gradual erosion of the partnership that had been their marriage's strongest feature. They talked more on the second day. Pell told her about the nights he had lain awake, calculating the debt, and the mornings he had stood at the window, measuring the fields against the numbers, and finding the fields insufficient. He told her about the shame, which was not a single feeling, but a cumulative one, building like silt in a river until the river could not flow. By the time the farm appeared on the horizon, the house, the barn, the fields where the wheat stubble stood in rows like evidence of work completed, they had covered the distance between the line camp and home, and the larger distance between the silence that Pell had been carrying since spring and the conversation he should have had instead of leaving. Arvid saw them coming. He was standing at his fence line, and he raised his hand, and Linnea raised hers. And the gesture was the gesture of people who understand that the crisis is over, and the understanding does not require words. The debt was paid by spring. It was paid through the winter wheat that Linnea insisted they plant in November, which came in strong and sold well, and through the eggs and butter she sold in town, and through the harness repair work that Pell took on from neighboring farms during the winter months. $47, paid in small, stubborn increments, 5 here, 3 there, 8 when the butter money came in, by 2 people who had learned that the only debt that cannot be repaid is the one you try to carry alone. The woman who drove 3 counties to bring her husband home, and the man who left without a word and came back with one, sorry, which he said again on the porch of the house when they arrived, and which Linnea accepted with a nod that contained forgiveness and warning in equal measure, built the rest of their life on the understanding that leaving is not protection, that shame is not a strategy, and that a marriage strong enough to survive a disappearance is strong enough to survive anything else the Dakota Territory could produce, which, as it turned out, was considerable, and which they faced together every single time, because together was the only direction that worked.